There. Severin Carrell is the Scotland editor for The Guardian, a busy man today, Severin. What are the headlines for you?
Well, I think the fact that Nicola Sturgeon has actually managed to seize the initiative in quite a dramatic way in a week in which most people have been expecting events at Westminster to be dominating the headlines. We thought there'd be an easy transition to SNP conference this weekend, a lot of grandstanding, and then probably an announcement by Sturgeon in the rest sometime later on in the month. But now she's basically dominated the agenda. Is a very strong implication. She's actually forced the UK government to postpone triggering Article 50, which they were due to be doing tomorrow by many.
Are we sure of that?
Well, there's a lot of evidence and suggestions, backdoor chatter and so forth, that definitely was on the agenda. Now, the fact of the matter is that she's now got all the headlines and she's changed the terms of the debate.
I was in Bute House, you may have been too, on June the 24th, the morning after the night before, when she said, the substantial change that was required to consider another referendum has arrived. I mean, in a sense, we've been on a track leading us to this destination. It's just the timing that's shifted.
I think that's broadly true. I think that a lot of the timing of this and the choreography is dependent very much on what the UK government has done. Now, there have been periods in the last 8 months where the news cycle has appeared to favour the UK government, where you could see the Scottish government starting to back away from this agenda, wondering whether or not the Brexit dividend for Scotland would be large enough and substantial enough for them to think, you know what, we're not going to win this battle. But the more that both sides have hardened their positions, the more that the UK government has hardened its position that actually it will determine what powers come to Scotland via Brussels.
We haven't dwelt on that, but that's a key point, isn't it? Powers, if and when the UK leaves the European Union, there are various competencies that will be returned to the UK. Now, do they come here, to Holyrood? Do they go to Westminster? And you suggest perhaps that it's been a stick to beat the SNP with, the threat that they'll go to Westminster.
I think the other way around. I mean, May's position has been that actually once we're out of Europe, then European powers reside with a member state. And the problem is that the Scottish government and the Welsh government of Northern Ireland actually have substantial independence and autonomy on European powers. Like Scotland controls fisheries in Scottish waters, with the exception of common fisheries policies issues. But, it's the Scottish government that runs the marine protection vessels, for instance. It's the Scottish government that works with the trawlermen on different strategies about how to protect quotas, protect stocks. So what Edinburgh believed, the Scottish government believed, was that actually because these are devolved powers, everything that was in Brussels would automatically come back to Edinburgh. Theresa May, over the last 6 weeks, has made pretty clear that absolutely not. That is not the way this is going to work. There's also £500 million worth of agricultural subsidies. Scotland, the Scottish government might argue that they want all of that money here in Holyrood. Theresa May and DEFRA are saying, maybe not. We may be controlling all of this money. And that's part of the reason why Sturgeon feels on very strong ground to go to war now.
Well, let's talk about money, because one reason she may feel she's emboldened to take the steps she's taken is the polls, which perhaps a little counterintuitively are showing support for independence increasing marginally, fractionally, but enough perhaps to be decisive, even though the problems about what you do with about a single currency remain, as they have done in recent times, as troublesome as ever. Oil receipts, on which an whole economic model under Alex Salmond was predicated, remain not what they could be. So those fundamentals are just the same.
Yeah, this is all true, but bearing in mind that opinion polls are the same as referendums. Referendum and opinion polls basically measure sentiment. They don't always measure the real facts, the objective truths, because there may be an instinctive feeling a lot of Scottish voters are saying, you know what, we're not happy with the idea of the Tory party in London, who, as far as the SNP are concerned, have a marginal mandate up here, dictating what happens to Scotland. And Nicola Sturgeon made clear in her speech in Bute House there are some people forecasting the Tories could be in power at Westminster until 2030 because of the disarray in the Labour Party. And as a consequence, that builds up this sense that Scotland and England are drifting apart. They may be very good neighbours, but they're no longer in a marriage. And that's going to be very much the way in which the SNP are going to be positioning this whole debate and this whole discussion. A lot of the detail as well is also quite debatable, because Nicola Sturgeon will also point out that if the Irish are going to get a special deal from the UK with an open border, common travel area, why can't Scotland? If the UK is going to be striking free trade deals with all 27 EU member states through the EU, well, why can't Scotland if it's a member of the EU as well?
We've got to wrap up, Severin. Just one final thought. We've got some young activists being put up to walking around with a saltire here. Are people actually ready, really, for all the hullabaloo of another independence referendum. It wasn't that long ago, and it was exhausting.
No, and I think that is part of the gamble that Nicola Sturgeon is facing, because the opinion polls do show consistently that only a small, well, say about less than 40% of Scottish voters want a second vote before Brexit. Now, there are a number that would actually have a referendum after Brexit, and Nicola Sturgeon's challenge is that she's got to try and persuade those people that actually now is the time, and if you don't do this now, it's probably going to be much more difficult to be independent after Brexit.
Severin Carrell, Scotland editor of The Guardian. Severin, thanks very much indeed.